I had driven 11 hours to stand at a fence and read a dog's name off a card. The kennels sat at the back corner of the base, past the motor pool and the ranges, where the pavement gave up and the gravel started. I got there at 0500, before the feed truck, before the lights, when the runs were still just shapes in the blue dark. I parked where the visitors park, which is nowhere, and walked the fence line with my hands in my jacket pockets and my breath going white in front of me. I was not in uniform. I want to be honest about that because it matters to what happened next. I had come a day before I was due to check in civilian clothes, an old canvas jacket, and boots that had nothing to do with the Marine Corps, and I had come for one reason that had nothing to do with orders. A friend had sent me a message 3 days earlier. 6 words. "He's not getting up anymore, Cam." So I read the run cards in the dark. Each run had a laminated card, zip-tied to the gate, the dog's name and tattoo number and feeding notes in a duty NCO's block letters. I went down the line reading names I did not know, looking for one I did. My left leg ached the way it always ached in cold that early, a deep ache in the hip that I had stopped complaining about years ago because complaining did not move it. I found the card at the far end. The name on it was Rocco. The note said what I already knew and had driven 11 hours not to believe. Reduced intake, will not stand for feed. Monitor. I stood there and put 2 fingers through the chain link, not reaching for anything, just standing, and I said his name once quietly, the way you say a name you have not said out loud in a long time. That is when the truck came. Headlights swung across the gravel, and 2 young Marines climbed out of a government pickup with a feed bin in the bed. They were talking loud the way you talk when you think nobody is around to hear you, and they did not see me until they were most of the way to the runs. Then one of them did. "Hey." He stopped. "Hey, you can't be back here." I turned around slow and kept my hands where they were, in my pockets, visible enough. "Morning," I said. He was maybe 21, Lance Corporal chevrons on the collar of his camis, a good jaw, and a bad attitude, and the specific confidence of a young man who has never once been the smallest thing in the room. The other one was younger, a private first class, already pulling his phone out of his pocket for reasons that would become clear. "This is a restricted area," the Lance Corporal said. He came at me at an angle, the way you heard something. "Are you lost? You a spouse or something? This isn't a petting zoo, lady." "I'm not lost," I said. I should have said more. Later I would think about that, the way you always think about the sentence you did not say. But there is a thing that happens to me in moments like that, a stillness that comes down like a shade, and it does not produce sentences. It produces patience. I had been trained into that stillness over 17 years, and it had kept me alive at least once, and it has one flaw, which is that to a certain kind of young man, it reads like weakness. "She's not lost, she's trespassing," the private said, and laughed and lifted the phone. "You need to leave," the Lance Corporal said, "right now." "I'm going to check in with your kennel master when he gets here," I said. "I'll wait by my truck." I turned to go. "I want that on the record, too." I turned to leave. He grabbed my shoulder. It was not a careful hand. It was a shove, dressed up as a redirection, the heel of his palm driving into the meat of my shoulder to spin me, and my bad leg did not catch the way a good leg would have, and I went down. Gravel came up and took the skin off both my palms and one knee, and I heard the private laughing, and I heard the wet plastic click of a phone recording, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a boot come to rest a few inches from the small of my back. Not on me, near me. A boot placed there to be in the video. "Stay down, sweetheart," the private said, delighted. I stayed down, not because of the boot. I have been on the ground under worse than 2 bored Marines. I stayed down because in the half-second it took to get my palms flat in the gravel, I had done the arithmetic on the 2 of them. And the arithmetic said they were young and stupid and unsupervised, and nothing they were doing to me was worth what would happen to all 4 of us if I made it a fight. So I breathed. I felt the cold come up through my palms. I looked at the gravel an inch from my face, and I let the shade come all the way down. And in that half-second, the way it does, the leg pulled a different morning up out of the dark and laid it over this one. Behind the 2 of them, at the far end of the runs, in the dark, something old and slow got to its feet. I got up on my own. That is a small thing, but it was mine, so I took it. I got a knee under me, and then a boot, and I stood, and I brushed the gravel off my palms onto my jeans and left a little blood there, and I did not look at either of them the way they wanted to be looked at. People think restraint is the absence of a reaction. It is not. It is a reaction. It is the most expensive reaction there is because you pay for it with everything you are not allowed to do, and the bill comes due in your chest and your jaw and the tendons of your hands, and you stand there and you pay it and you keep your face still while you do. I learned it late. I did not come into the Marine Corps calm. I came in at 18 from a mill town where the mill had already closed, with a chip on my shoulder the size of the county, and the thing that ground the chip down was not a drill instructor. It was the work. Specifically, it was a job I fell into almost by accident 2 years in, when a gunnery sergeant with a German shepherd on a lead looked at me on a working party and said, "You like dogs?" And I said, "Not especially," and he said, "Good. The ones who love them too much are useless. Come here." That was how I became a dog handler. And a dog will teach you restraint the way nothing else will, because a dog reads everything you do not say. Your fear runs straight down the leash into an animal that outweighs its own judgment with loyalty. And if you cannot govern yourself, you cannot govern the dog. And if you cannot govern the dog, you both get somebody killed. So you learn to be still. You learn to put the storm somewhere below your hands where the leash cannot feel it. And after enough years, the stillness stops being a technique and becomes a person, and the person is you. And you cannot always turn her off when the situation would be simpler if you did. I grew up in a town built around a mill in the years after the mill closed, which is its own kind of education. When the thing a place exists to do stops happening, the place does not admit it. It just gets quieter and meaner and more certain about who is going to amount to something and who is not, and by the time I was 14, the town had me filed. Doran girl, chip on her shoulder, loud, trouble, not going anywhere. You learn early, in a town like that people will hand you a shape and expect you to climb into it, and that the climbing is not optional in their minds, and that the fastest way to make them cruel is to refuse. My father was one of the ones who filed me. He had a son in his head, a son he did not have. And he measured me against that son every day of my childhood, and every day I came up short of a boy who did not exist. He was not a monster. That is the part that took me years to understand. He was just a disappointed man who had learned from his own disappointed father that the way you love a child is by telling them all the ways they are not enough yet, and I spent 18 years being not enough yet. And then I left for boot camp, mostly to be not enough, yet somewhere he could not watch. The Marine Corps did not fix me. I want to be careful about that, because it is a nice story that the uniform straightens a person out, and it is mostly not true. I came in angry, and I stayed angry for a good while. My first platoon sergeant took one look at me and decided what I was, the way the town had, and he found a nickname for it that I will not repeat, a nickname about why he thought I had been let in, and he used it in front of other people until it stuck. And I gave him exactly the reaction he wanted, for months, because I did not yet know that the reaction is the whole game, that a person who can make you flinch owns a little piece of you every time they do it. What changed me was the dog. Not one dog. The work. Standing at the end of a leash with a green animal who could feel my anger travel down the lead and did not care about my reasons for it, only about whether it made me trustworthy or not. And it did not, and he told me so by refusing to work, and there is no arguing with that verdict. You cannot explain your childhood to a dog. You cannot tell him about the mill or your father or the platoon sergeant. You can only be steady, or not, and he will know which, and so you learn to be steady for him, because he needs it, and one day, you notice you have become steady for yourself too, almost by accident, as a side effect of loving something that required it. That is who I actually was, standing in that gravel. Not a lost spouse, a gunnery sergeant with 17 years in, and a specialty that had rebuilt me from the leash up, reporting to take over this compound, carrying a stillness that 2 young men were misreading as the thing my hometown always thought I was. The gap between what they saw and what was standing there was the whole width of my life. They could not have known. That is the point of a gap. Nobody standing on one side can see the other. So I stood in the gravel and I was still, and the 2 of them read it as a win. "See? She gets it," the lance corporal said. His name tape, now that I was upright and close, said Marsh. The privates said Ridley, and Ridley still had the phone up, framing me, walking a slow half circle to get my face. "You should post that," Marsh said to him. "Lady sneaking into the kennels at 05. "Already recording," Ridley said. I want to tell you I was thinking about them. I was not particularly. I was thinking about the message on my phone, the 6 words, and about the card, zip-tied to the far gate, and about the fact that I had built the last 3 days of my life around the possibility that I might be too late, and that I had just been knocked into the gravel 40 feet from the only reason I had come, and that the whole thing was, from a certain height, almost funny. A friend had texted me on a Tuesday. "He's not getting up anymore, Cam. Thought you'd want to know. He is the current kennel master here, or he was until this week, a man named Nick Harlan, who I had known for a dozen years, and he had done me the mercy of telling me the truth instead of letting me arrive to find it. Because the dog on the far gate card was mine, had been mine, was mine again in every way that a thing like that stays yours. I looked past Marsh and Ridley, down the row of runs, into the dark where the shape had stood. I did not say anything to the two Marines. I said one word, low, and I said it to the dog. Rocco. His name was Rocco, and I did not name him. The Marine Corps named him the way it names all of them, off a list, and I inherited the name with the dog in the spring of 2016 when a sergeant with 8 years in got handed a green 3-year-old Belgian Malinois and told the two of us were now a team. He was not an easy dog. The easy dogs wash out or get sent to gate duty. The good ones have something wrong with them that is also the thing that makes them good. Rocco's wrong thing was that he did not trust cheaply. He worked for me for a full month before he worked for me, if that makes sense. And when he finally decided, he decided all the way that breed does, with a loyalty that has no brakes on it. We deployed twice, Helmand Province, 2017, and again in 2018. Our job was to walk in front. That is the plain way to say it. An explosives detection dog and his handler walk point on the compound, sweeps, and the route clearances. And the dog's nose is the difference between the patrol crossing a field and the patrol crossing a field that has been seeded to kill them. You learn to read a dog the way other people read a book. A change in his breathing, the set of his ears, the exact quality of a sit that means he has found something that should not be there. Downrange, the two of us lived closer than most married people ever do. He slept against me. He ate before I ate. In the heat, I poured half my water into his mouth before I took any myself, because a dog cannot tell you he is cooking until he is nearly gone, and a handler who loses his dog to the sun has failed at the one job that matters more than any patrol. I learned his moods the way you learn weather. I knew when he was bored, and when he was locked on, and when he had decided a man walking toward our position was wrong before the man himself had decided anything. There is a kind of knowing that lives below language, and Rocco and I built a whole one of those between us. A language with no words in it, only breath and weight and the small shifts of an animal telling a person what the world is doing. He was right more times than I can count, and most of those times nothing happened, because being right about a threat means the threat never gets to be a story. That is the invisible arithmetic of the work. The good days are the days where a dog sits down in a doorway and everyone groans and reroutes and grumbles about the mutt slowing them down, and nobody ever knows what was behind the door because nobody ever opens it. You do not get medals for the doors you did not open. You get tired feet and a patrol that resents the delay, and you take it because the alternative to the resentment is a memorial service, and you have been to those too. There was a day, our first tour, when he alerted on a culvert and I called the halt and a lieutenant fresh in country overruled me, said we were behind schedule, said the dog was tired, and started the patrol forward anyway. And Rocco physically would not go. He set his feet and he leaned back against the lead and he made himself a 70-pound anchor in the dirt, and I stood there holding him and looking at that lieutenant, and something in my face must have finally been louder than his schedule because he stopped. They cleared the culvert. It was packed. If we had walked it, we would have walked it with the whole squad in the blast radius. The lieutenant never thanked me and never thanked the dog. And I did not need him to, because I had already learned that the thanks in this line of work comes from the fact of everybody still breathing, and Rocco could not read a thank you anyway. He could only read me. So I told him he was a good boy, which he could read, and that was the entire ceremony, and it was enough. I tell you all of that so you understand that the morning in the Gap was not luck. It was the 10,000th time I trusted him, and the 10,000th time he was right. It only looks like a single dramatic morning from the outside. From the inside, it was the natural end of 1,000 ordinary mornings of two creatures learning to believe each other. On a morning in the spring of 2018, on a sweep of a compound outside a village, whose name I will not put in this, Rocco sat. He sat in the open, in a gap between two mud walls, and he would not move, and he looked back at me. And a young corporal behind me, a good Marine named Ash Delgado, who had a wife and a baby on the way, and a running joke that he did not trust the dog because the dog did not like him, said, "Doran, he's just tired, come on." And I said, "He is not tired." And I trusted the dog. I made them stop. I made them back out of the gap the way we had come. And because we were stopped and bunched, the men who had set the charge and the ambush around it lost their patience and triggered early. And the wall came apart. And the world went white and flat and silent and then loud. I do not remember the shrapnel going into my leg. Your body does you that one kindness. I remember the after. I remember dragging Ash Delgado by the drag handle on the back of his kit because his leg was worse than mine and he could not use it. And I remember getting the two of us behind the broken wall, and I remember that the whole time, over both of us, in the open, taking fire, stood a 70-pound dog who would not leave. He would not leave. I called him down, and he would not go down. He stood over us with his ears back and his lips off his teeth, and he made a sound I had never heard him make and have never heard since, and he stayed there until the fire lifted and the others got to us. He put himself between two wounded Marines and the thing that was trying to finish them, because one of the wounded Marines was me, and in the arithmetic of that dog, I was the whole world, and the whole world was worth dying on top of. The aid post is a blur I have never fully gotten back, and I have stopped trying. What I kept is small and specific. I kept the weight of Delgado's kit in my hands. I kept the sound Rocco made over us, which I have already told you I have never heard since. And I kept the moment at the aid station when a corpsman tried to move the dog away from my litter so he could work on my leg, and the dog would not be moved, and finally they gave up and worked around him, because he had appointed himself, and there was no unappointing him. I lay there with a leg full of metal and a dog's chin on my chest, and I remember thinking, with the strange clarity that comes when the body is too busy to let the mind lie, that I had never in my life been loved that plainly by anything. The leg took a year and change to become a leg again. There were surgeries, and there was hardware, and there was the particular humiliation of having to be taught to walk in my late 20s by a physical therapist younger than me who was very kind and very relentless. There were nights I did not think I would get back to full duty, and mornings I was sure of it, and the two feelings traded places on no schedule I could predict. What got me through was not grit, whatever people mean by that word. It was a stubbornness I inherited from the same town and the same father that had filed me, turned finally to a use worth having. I had spent my whole youth refusing to climb into the shape people handed me. Now I refused to climb into the shape the injury handed me, the shape of a woman the Marine Corps would thank and quietly retire. I did not want the thanks. I wanted the work back. I got most of it back. Not all. The leg tells the weather, and it does not run the way it ran, and there are billets I will never hold because of it. But I got back to the dogs, which was the only part I would have fought that hard for. And Rocco and I ran one more workup together before the program moved us to different chapters of the same book, me toward instructing and leading, him toward the last of his working years, and then the retirement that had led, eventually, to a run at the back of this kennel with a card that said he would not stand for feed. They gave me a medal for that morning, a bronze star with a small bronze V on the ribbon for valor, for pulling Delgado clear. There is a citation. It is a good citation. It is also a story the Marine Corps tells about that morning, and the story is true, and the story is not the morning. The morning was a dog sitting in a gap and looking back at me and asking me to believe him, and me believing him, and all of us living because of it. The medal has my name on it. The morning belongs to the dog. Ash Delgado is alive. He has 2 kids now, not 1. He got out, sells industrial equipment somewhere green and quiet, and he calls me on the anniversary every year and says the same thing. And I let him, because he needs to say it more than I need to not hear it. That dog in you, he says. I've got 2 kids because of a dog in you. I did not tell any of that to Marsh and Ridley. You cannot hand a stranger a morning like that. They would not know what they were holding. I only said the dog's name. Once. Into the dark. And the line between the dog and that memory and the dog and the far run went taut, like a lead coming up off the ground. I have seen a lot of things move on a battlefield and off one, but I am not sure I have seen anything move quite like Rocco moved across that yard. He should not have been able to. I knew what the card said. Reduced intake, will not stand for feed. Nick had told me on the phone that he had not seen the dog on his feet in the better part of a year, that the hips had gone and the eyes had gone milky with cataract, and that the vet techs turned him and carried him and hand-fed him what he would take, and that mostly what he did was lie in the back of his run with his face to the wall like a man who has decided. 11 years old is old for that breed. 11 years old, after 2 war deployments and a working career, is very old. He had earned the wall and the turning away, and he got up. He got up out of the dark at the back of the run, and he came to the gate of it. And one of the vet techs must have left the run gate on the latch because it swung. And he came out. He came down the row, slow, so slow, his back end not quite tracking his front, his blind head swinging low the way a blind dog's head swings to read the world through his nose. He came past the feed bin. He came past Ridley, who said, "Whoa, hey," and stepped back. He came straight past Marsh, who put a hand out and said the word every handler says without thinking. "Rocco, heel. Rocco, heel. He doesn't. He never." Rocco did not heel. Rocco had healed for exactly one person in his life who was not on a duty roster. and that person was standing bleeding lightly from both palms in a civilian jacket at the end of the row. And the dog's ruined eyes did not need to see her, because 11 years old and half blind and 3 days from the end, he still had the one sense that outlasts all the others, the one that had kept him working long after his hips filed their complaint. And he had caught it on the cold air the moment I said his name. He came to me and he put himself between me and the two Marines, and he leaned. He leaned his whole failing weight into my shins, the way he used to lean against my ribs in the back of a vehicle before a mission, and his legs were shaking with the cost of standing, and I went down to a knee to take the weight off him, and I got both arms around his chest, and I felt his heart going, too fast, and I put my face down into the fur at the back of his neck, which had gone gray at the muzzle, and I breathed him in, and he smelled like an old dog, and like every good morning I had ever had. Behind me, a screen door banged. "What in the world?" a man's voice said, and stopped. I looked up. Nick Harlan stood on the step of the kennel office in a t-shirt and unlaced boots with a coffee going cold in his hand, staring at the dog on his feet in the middle of the yard, and his face had come completely open, the way a face does when it is looking at something it has already decided is impossible. "That dog," Nick said, slowly, "hasn't stood in a year." Nobody said anything. Marsh had his hand still half out from the heel command that had not worked. Ridley had, without quite deciding to, lowered the phone. And Rocco stood in the circle of my arms and leaned, and the yard, which a minute before had been two young men laughing, went completely quiet. There is a moment, right after a thing tips, where it could still go any direction, and everyone in the yard can feel the weight of it looking for a place to fall. Nick set his coffee down on the step. He came off the step and across the gravel, and he was not looking at me anymore. He was looking at Marsh and Ridley, and I watched the temperature of him change as he walked. Nick Harlan is a big man, 41, 22 years in, a gunnery sergeant like me, and he is one of the calmest people I've ever known. And I've only twice seen him get quiet in the specific way he got quiet then. Both times somebody had done something that was going to cost them a lot. "Marshmore," he said. "Ridley. Why is there a civilian on the ground in my compound?" "Gunny, she was inside the wire." "We didn't," Marsh started. "I didn't ask what she was. I asked why she's bleeding." Ridley had the phone down at his side now, screen still lit, and he was doing the thing that young men do when the floor moves, which is look at the person next to them to find out how scared to be. Marsh was not a good place to look. Marsh had gone pale under the good jaw. "He shoved her," Ridley said, quietly to Nick. "Gunny, he shoved her down we were filming it." "Shut up, Cole," Marsh said. "You shut up," Nick said, not loud, and it landed like a door closing. And here's where I had a decision to make. On my knee in the gravel, with 70 pounds of dying dog leaning into me and his heart going too fast under my hand. And I want to be careful about how I tell it, because it is the part of the morning I am proudest of, and it did not feel like pride at the time. It felt like a pull. Two pulls, going opposite ways. One pull was the easy one, and I will not pretend I did not feel it. It would have taken nothing. I could have stood up and let the shade lift off my face and let Nick see it. Let both of those boys see it. And said the true and simple sentence, "Do you know who I am?" And watched the morning turn into the kind of story they would tell at their own expense for the rest of their enlistments. It was right there. It had been handed to me. Marsh had put me in the gravel, and Ridley had filmed it, and the whole thing was documented and witnessed and wrong. And the machine that would take it from there and grind those two boys into powder was standing 8 feet away in unlaced boots waiting for me to give it a name. The other pull was the dog. Rocco was breathing against my chest in short pulls that were costing him, and every second the four of us spent turning this into a reckoning was a second he was standing up for it, because he would not lie down while I was down, and I was down, on a knee, holding him, and the arithmetic that had told me to stay in the gravel a few minutes earlier now told me something harder. It told me that I had driven 11 hours for the dog and not for the satisfaction, and that if I let the satisfaction eat the morning, I would deserve the version of me that those two boys thought they were looking at. I have been on the receiving end of the other choice. Not from Marsh. From a whole life of people who took the easy pull when they had me on a knee. The mill town that decided what I was at 14. A father who measured me against a son he did not have. A first platoon sergeant who called me the diversity hire to my face and made it a nickname. Every one of them took the easy pull, the free shot, the thing that cost them nothing and cost me a piece. And I had told myself somewhere along the way that if I ever stood over somebody the way they stood over me, I would remember how the gravel felt. so I did not stand up and end anybody's career in a gravel lot at 0530. I looked up at Nick, and I kept my voice as level as I could with the dog shaking against me. "Gunny," I said, "before anybody's career ends out here, help me get him inside. He shouldn't be standing. Help me get him down." Nick looked at me. Something crossed his face, a first flicker of a question, because a lost spouse does not talk like that and does not think about a private's career in the middle of her own assault. But the dog came first for him too, the way it always does with the good ones, and he crossed to us and got down on Rocco's other side, and the two of us made a cradle of our arms under that old dog's chest and belly and took his weight off his hips. "Easy," Nick said, to the dog, to me, to the morning. "Easy, we've got him." And we carried him in, and I chose the dog over the reckoning, and I did not understand yet that choosing the dog was the reckoning, that it would land harder than any name I could have said. The vet space was warm, which after the yard was its own small mercy. We got Rocco onto the padded table, and Nick held him while I ran my hands down him the way you do, reading. And the reading was not good, and I already knew it would not be. The hips were nothing but knobs and grind. The ribs came up too easy under my palms. His muzzle was almost white, and his eyes, when I put my face in front of them, tracked toward the shape of me and the smell of me, but not the sight, because the sight was mostly gone. He knew me anyway. He kept trying to lean off the table into me, and I kept my hand flat on his chest and told him I was there, and the tight, fast heart under my hand slowed down, a little, because I was there. Nick was quiet for a while. Then he said, not looking at me, "You want to tell me your name, or you want me to keep pretending I don't already know it?" I looked at him. "You checked in a day early and out of uniform," he said. "In a jacket that's seen a war. And you put your hand on a dog that hasn't let a stranger touch him in a year, and he stood up off the floor to get to you. And you're worried about a lance corporal's career while you're bleeding." He finally looked at me. "There's exactly one person in the Marine Corps that dog would do that for, and she's on my incoming roster as my relief, Gunnery Sergeant Doran." "Cam," I said. "I know," Nick said. "I was there when you got the star, Cam. I stood in the back." I hadn't known that. I did not have anything to say to it, so I ran my hand down the dog again. Nick told me the rest then. Lo, the way you deliver a thing you would rather not. The base vet had done a full workup 2 weeks earlier. It was not one thing. It was the whole animal winding down at once, the kidneys and the heart and the hips, and there was no surgery and no diet and no protocol. There was only comfort and time, and the vet's honest read on the time was weeks, not months. Weeks. He walked me through the numbers because I asked him to, and because I am the kind of person who would rather hold the hard thing in my own 2 hands than have it described to me from across a room. The blood work, the values that were too high and the ones that were too low, the heart that was working too hard to move too little. He was gentle about it, but he did not soften the arithmetic because he knew I did not want it softened. And that is a mercy of its own, to be told the truth by someone who trusts you to carry it. There was no version of the next few weeks where any of it got better. There was only a version where it got slower and kinder, or a version where it got faster and worse, and the only lever anyone had was which of those we chose, and we chose slower and kinder, and that was the whole of what medicine could do. I have sat across from that same arithmetic before, in a different uniform, in a different room, about a person. I know the shape of it. There is a specific stillness that comes over you when a professional tells you that the thing you love is going to end and that the schedule is not up for negotiation, only the terms. Most people fill that stillness with words, with questions they already know the answers to, with bargaining. I have learned not to. I let it be quiet. I let the fact come all the way into the room and sit down. You cannot fight it, and you cannot flatter it, and you certainly cannot outrank it. You can only decide how the time that is left is going to feel, for the one who is leaving and for the ones staying, and then you can spend yourself making it feel that way. I took it standing, with my hand on his chest. That is the only way I know how to take anything. I did not make a sound. But something must have shown because Nick put his big hand on the back of my neck for 1 second, the way you do to a person and not a Marine, and then took it back and let me have the moment without watching it. I made a decision in that warm room, 2 of them really, and I made them the way I make everything, quietly and all the way. The first was about Rocco, and it was simple, and it was not a decision so much as a recognition of a thing that had already decided itself the moment he stood up. He was not going to spend his weeks in a run with his face to the wall being turned by strangers. He was mine again. He had always been mine. When I checked in, I would file the adoption paperwork that retired working dogs get, the paperwork that lets a handler take an old partner home, and I would take him to the small place I had rented off base, and whatever weeks there were, he would have them on a floor by my bed and not on concrete. The second decision was about Marsh and Ridley, and it was harder because it ran against the current in my own chest. I decided I was not going to break them. I had every right to. I want to keep saying that because the mercy does not mean much if you pretend the debt was not real. He put me in the gravel. That is an assault. It is also, if I made it one, a career, a rank, a security clearance, a young man's whole shape of a future, gone in a gravel lot before breakfast. And the thing I had learned from a life of people taking the free shot was that the free shot feels like justice and functions like cruelty, and that I did not want to be one more person who taught a 21-year-old that the world is just people with power doing to you what they can because they can. So I decided to own them instead, to take them as their incoming kennel master and make them mine the way Rocco had been made mine, slowly, against their will at first, until they were something better than the two boys in the yard. I signed nothing in that room, but I had already decided everything. The sergeant major came at 0600. I do not know if Nick called her or if she was already doing her rounds. And it does not matter because Vera Longmire is the kind of senior enlisted who is always, somehow, already on her way to wherever the problem is. She is the Provost Sergeant Major, 49, Ramrod, gray, coming in at the temples of a regulation bun, and she had been a lance corporal on a gun line back when I was in grade school, and there is not a lot on a base that surprises her. She came into the vet space and took it in at a glance, the dog on the table, the blood dried on my palms, Nick's face, the two Marines who had followed us in and were standing against the far wall not knowing what to do with their hands. "Somebody," Longmire said, "is going to tell me why the incoming kennel master is bleeding in my vet clinic." So she knew too. Of course she knew. The whole small world of the working dog program knew Doran and Rocco the way a small world knows its own legends, the good ones and the sad ones, and I was about to be both. Nobody answered her fast enough, so I did. "I came in early to see my dog, Sergeant Major," I said. "There was a misunderstanding at the fence. It's handled." "Is it?" She looked at Marsh and Ridley. She let the quiet sit on them. Then she crossed the room to them, unhurried, and stood closer than was comfortable. And when she spoke, it was not a shout. It was worse than a shout. It was low and precise, and it went in like a needle. "You," she said to Marsh, "put your hands on a woman inside your own wire and knocked her to the ground. And you," to Ridley, "made a movie of it. You want to know who she is. She's a gunnery sergeant. She's your new kennel master, effective in about 30 hours. Her name is on the orders that reassign this whole compound. She has a bronze star with a V on it for a morning in Helmand that I have read the citation for, and that you two could not survive in a video game." She let that land. Neither of them moved. "And that dog," Longmire said, and here her voice did something it had not done yet. It dropped even further. "Is the reason half the men on that convoy came home. That dog stood over her in the open under fire when she was down, the way she was down in your gravel this morning. He hasn't stood in a year. He stood up for her today because a dog remembers what a man forgets. He knew who she was before you did. Think about that every day for the rest of your enlistment." Ridley made a small sound. Marsh was staring at the floor with the specific, fixed intensity of a young man realizing the exact dimensions of what he has done. Ridley's hand moved toward his pocket, toward the phone, and I knew what he was going to do. He was going to delete the video, make it disappear, unhappen it. "Don't," I said. Everyone looked at me. "Don't delete it," I said. "Keep it." The gap between the woman they had put in the gravel and the woman standing in the warm room with her hand on a legend's chest had closed all the way, and nobody had raised their voice to close it, and I could see in both their faces that they would have vastly preferred the shouting. The sergeant major looked at me for a long moment when I told Ridley to keep the video. She is nobody's fool, and she wanted to be sure I was not making a soft call I would regret. Then she read whatever was on my face, and she nodded once, and she said, "Your compound, your Marines, your call, effective now as far as I'm concerned. I'll be by." And she left, and she took the machine with her, the machine that grinds boys into powder, and she left me the two boys instead. I want to tell you what I did with the video, because it is the part people do not expect, and it is the part that mattered. Later that morning, after we had Rocco settled and comfortable and I had cleaned the gravel out of my palms, I had Marsh and Ridley sit down with me at the scarred table in the kennel office, and I had Ridley put the phone on the table between us, and I made all three of us watch it. It is a hard thing to watch a video of yourself being knocked to the ground. It is a harder thing, I found, to watch it sitting between the two people who did it, while all three of you are sober and quiet and nobody is laughing. On the small screen, the whole ugly little thing played out. The shove, the way I went down, the boot, the private's laugh, thin and delighted. Stay down, sweetheart. I did not say anything for the first watch. I made them watch it again. I'm not keeping that so I can hang you with it, I said when it ended the second time. If I wanted to hang you, the sergeant major already handed me the rope and I gave it back. I'm keeping it because I want you to keep it. I want you to have it on that phone, and I want you to look at it sometimes, and I want you to remember that you cannot tell by looking who a person is. You looked at me and you saw a lost spouse who wandered in. You were so sure. You were so sure that you put your hands on her. I looked at Marsh. You have got to cure yourself of being that sure about a stranger. It is going to get you killed, or it is going to make you into something you do not want to be, and I am not sure which is worse. Marsh had not said much. He said something then, and to his credit, he looked at me when he said it, which is harder than looking at the floor. Gunny, I don't. There's no excuse. I'm not going to give you one. His jaw worked. I put my hands on you. I'd have never done that too. I thought you were nobody. There it is, I said. That's the whole thing. Right there. And I want you to hear yourself say it. You thought I was nobody, so it was fine. Marsh, there is no nobody. That is the entire lesson. There is no nobody. The tired old dog in the back run that everybody carries and hand feeds and writes off, the one you walked past this morning like he was furniture, put himself between you and me on legs that can't hold him, because to him there is no nobody either. He's got more sense than the both of you and he can't see. Neither of them had an answer for the dog. There is not one. Nick handled the actual handover of the compound over the next day and a half. The way he handled everything, cleanly, with good notes and no drama, walking me through the runs and the roster and the standing problems. And somewhere in there, the respect between us settled back into its old shape. The shape of two people who have carried the same weight in different years. When he signed the compound over to me, he did it in front of the whole kennel staff, formal, the way it should be done, and the two boys stood in that formation and watched their new kennel master take the yard. And the punishment I had given them, which was no punishment at all on paper, sat on them heavier than any page would have. I could see it. Responsibility is the heaviest thing you can hand a young man who expected to be broken. They kept waiting for the other boot. It did not come. What came instead was work and standards, and a woman who expected them to be better and did not explain why she thought they could be. The nights were the hard part. I would come back to the kennel after evening chow and let myself into the vet space where we had made Rocco a bed on the floor, thick pads, and an old poncho liner of mine that still smelled like a footlocker. And I would sit down on the floor next to him with my back against the cabinets and my bad leg out straight, and he would work his head over onto my boot and sigh the way old dogs sigh, and I would sit there in the low light and do the accounting. You do the accounting, whether you want to or not. 17 years. A leg that tells the weather. A citation in a frame that a colonel read out in a room while I stood at attention and thought about a gap between two mud walls. A marriage that did not survive the second deployment, which I have not mentioned because it is not this story, but it is in the accounting. Everything is in the accounting. And now this. A dog with weeks in him working his head onto my boot in a warm room, having spent one of his last standing moments getting up off a concrete floor to defend me from two children who did not know me. Here's a thing nobody tells you about being decorated. The medal is for the day you would give anything to undo. They pin the thing on you for the worst morning of your life. And people see the ribbon and they see a hero, and what you see every time is the gap and the dog sitting in it, and the specific weight of a wounded man's kit in your hands. The Marine Corps gave me a star for pulling Ash Delgado out. It did not have a medal for the actual heart of that morning, which was an animal deciding that my life was worth standing over. There is no ribbon for that. There is only the dog and the years, and now the floor of a vet clinic at night. I thought a lot those nights about the choice I had made in the gravel lot, and whether I had made it for the right reasons or only for reasons that flattered me. It is worth examining. It would have been very easy to dress up a failure of nerve as mercy, to tell myself I had spared those boys out of some higher wisdom when really I had just not wanted the paperwork or the ugliness. So I made myself look at it squarely. And what I decided, on the floor with the dog, was that the test of the thing was not how it felt to me, but what it did to them. And what it did to them was harder and better than what a report would have done. A report would have let them off. That sounds backward, so let me say it plainly. If I had run them up the chain, they would have taken their punishment, and a punishment is a transaction. You do the wrong thing, and you pay the price, and the ledger closes, and you get to feel that the account is settled. Being forgiven does not close the ledger. Being forgiven and then being made to work every single day under the person you wronged keeps the ledger open where a young man has to look at it. That is not soft. That is the least soft thing I know how to do to a person. I know it is the least soft thing because it was done to me once by the platoon sergeant of all people, years after the nickname, when he was a master sergeant and I was a young sergeant and our paths crossed again, and he had the grace, which I had never expected of him, to say that he had been wrong about me, and worse than wrong, cruel, and that he was sorry. He did not have to. It cost him something to do it. And that one conversation did more to unwind the knot he had tied in me than 100 formal apologies would have, because it was voluntary and it was specific, and it treated me as a person whose good opinion was worth the discomfort of asking for. I carried that. I did not know I was going to spend it on 2 Marines in a gravel lot until I spent it. That is how the good things move, I think. Somebody hands you a mercy you did not earn, and you hold it for years not knowing what it is for, and then one cold morning you find out. There is a temptation, when you have been underestimated your whole life, to become a collector of the moments when you are finally seen, to live for the face that falls, the apology, the room that goes quiet. I have felt it. I have felt the pull to make my whole self out of being right about how wrong they all were. And it is poison, that pull. It is a way of letting the people who doubted you keep authoring your life long after they have stopped paying attention to it. The healthiest thing I ever did was stop needing the moment. Rocco taught me that too, in his way, because a dog does not care whether the world has revised its opinion of you. A dog decided who you were a long time ago and has simply been waiting, patiently, on the far side of every gap for you to come back within range of his nose. I called Delgado that week. I had been meaning to and kept not doing it, and one night with Rocco's head on my boot, I finally did. "Cam," he said when he picked up, and I could hear kids in the background, the ordinary racket of a life. "It's not the anniversary. You never call except the anniversary. What's wrong?" "Rocco's dying," I said. There is no soft way, and he would not have wanted one. "He's got a couple weeks. I've got him with me. I wanted you to know." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, Is he in any pain?" And I told him no, we were keeping him ahead of it, and Delgado said, "Good." And then his voice went rough, and he said the thing he says, but in the present tense this time, which undid me a little. "That dog and you," he said. "Cam, I've got 2 kids because of a dog and you. My daughter's name. You know my daughter's name." I knew his daughter's name. He named her after the province. It is a strange thing to name a child after the worst place either of us has ever been. But I understood it, because the worst place is also where his life got given back to him. And a person will love the ground that gave him his life, even if that ground tried to take it first. I did not cry on the phone. I did that later, on the floor, quietly, with my hand on the dog, in the way you cry when you are alone and finally allowed to. Not much. Enough. Rocco lifted his head once at the change in my breathing and pushed his nose into my hand to check on me, still working, still on duty, 11 years old and blind and dying and still reading his handler and finding her wanting comfort and providing it. I let it be true, all of it at once, that I had been right, in the gap, all those years ago, that being right had cost me a leg and a marriage and put a medal on my chest I would trade in a heartbeat, that the dog who saved us was going to die on a floor in a few weeks, and there was nothing in my whole decorated, competent, capable self that could do a single thing about it, except be there. Right, and grieving, at the same time. I have stopped believing you have to choose between those two. I checked in officially, on a Monday, in uniform this time, service alphas pressed, and the ribbons on my chest, including the one with the little bronze V, and I took the compound for real. The paperwork on Rocco went through the way it goes through for retired working dogs. The adoption of a military working dog by his former handler, a form and a signature, and a base vet's endorsement, and the strange civilian sentence at the bottom of it that made an 11-year-old war dog my personal property and my personal responsibility for whatever time was left. I took him home that night. It is a small rented place with a bad kitchen and a good back step, and I carried him up the 2 stairs because he could not do them, and I put his bed by mine, and he slept the whole night through for the first time in a long time, according to the tech who had been turning him, and in the morning, on his own, he got up. He got up for morning feed. He stood in the little kitchen with his legs shaking and his blind head up and his ears trying, and he ate, standing, and I stood in the doorway in the gray light and watched a dog, everybody said, would not stand, do the thing everybody said he would not do, because he was home, and because I was there, and because for that dog, those 2 facts had always been enough to build a whole morning on. The 2 boys became mine, in earnest. I will not pretend it was a movie, that they were transformed overnight into fine young Marines. It was slower and less dramatic than that. But Marsh turned out to have real hands for the work, patience under the swagger, and I put him where that could grow. And Ridley, who had filmed me in the gravel, turned out to be the one who could not stay away from the old dog, who came by the kennel office on his own time to ask how Rocco was doing, who was there, near the end, on one of the days, and cried without being ashamed of it, which told me more about who he actually was than the video ever did. I made them handlers, both of them in the months after, real ones, and the first thing I taught them, before the commands and the reading and the long, slow work of earning a dog's trust, was the thing the gravel taught them for me. There is no nobody. Not on the other end of the leash, not on the other side of the fence, not in the back run with his face to the wall. You do not get to decide a living thing is furniture because you're having a morning and it is in your way. Word of the whole thing got around the kennel the way things get around a small unit, quietly and completely, and it changed the compound in a way I did not engineer and could not have. The staff had all walked past Rocco in his back run for the better part of a year, turning him and feeding him and doing right by him, but seeing him, if I am honest, the way you see a piece of equipment you are responsible for maintaining. Now they knew what he had done, and who he had done it for, and that the woman who had taken over their compound was the handler from the citation, and the old dog stopped being furniture to all of them at once. Marines who had never met me before found reasons to come by and sit on the floor with him for a few minutes. He got more hands on him in his last month than he had in his last year, and I think he liked it, in the patient way old dogs like company, and I know I liked watching a room full of hard young people relearn a thing about tenderness that the job tends to grind out of them. Ridley came the most. The private who had filmed me in the gravel could not stay away. He would knock on the office frame after his duty day and ask, in a voice trying hard to be casual, how the old man was doing, and then he would sit down on the floor without being asked and let Rocco put his head in his lap. And one evening near the end, he was there when the dog was having a hard hour, and he cried, openly, a 19-year-old crying over a dog he had known for a month and disrespected on the first morning, and he did not wipe it away fast or pretend it was something in his eye. He just let it be what it was. And I thought, watching him, that a person who can cry like that over a thing he wronged is a person who is going to be all right, and that the boy in the video and the boy on the floor were the same boy, and that the difference between them was only whether somebody had bothered to show him there was no nobody. I had bothered. Rocco had bothered, really, by standing up. I had only finished the sentence the dog started. Rocco had a good few weeks, better than the vet promised. He had the back step in the sun, and my boot at night, and one more spring of smells. And when it was time, it was on the floor by my bed, with my hand on his chest and my face in the gray fur at the back of his neck, the same place I had put it in the gravel that first morning, and he was not afraid, because I was there, and being there had always been the whole job. I want to say one thing to you, whoever you are, because if you have listened this long, you have probably been measured wrong by somebody who was very sheer. People are going to decide what you are by looking at you. They are going to do it fast, and they are going to be certain, and a certain number of them are going to put their hands on you because of what they decided, and the world will not always send a sergeant major to set it right. Most days there is no sergeant major. Most days the only one who knows what you really are is you, and maybe one old friend who calls on the anniversary, and maybe, if you have been very lucky in a very hard life, some loyal thing that remembers you when everyone else has forgotten how to look. Do not spend yourself proving them wrong. It is a trap, and it will eat your whole life. And when the day comes that the ground shifts and the ones who wrote you off finally see you, and it will come, you are going to have a choice, on your knee in the gravel with the thing you love shaking against you. You can pick up the rope somebody hands you and hang them with it, or you can give it back and take them instead and teach the thing you wish somebody had taught them before they got to you. There is no nobody. Not you. Not the person who wronged you, either, which is the harder half. An old blind dog got up off a floor he had not left in a year and crossed a yard he could not see to stand between me and two boys who did not know my name. He knew me. He always knew me. That is the whole story, and it is enough to build a life on. Be someone worth a dog like that. And when you find one, or a person like one, hold on, hold on. They are the only ones who ever really saw you, and they saw you the whole time. Rocco is gone now. I still get up for the morning feed. Some mornings, in the gray light, I still hear him breathing in the quiet,